I think there were not many people who understood just how broad his interests were and how supportive he was of an astonishingly wide range.
It began not with trumpets or fanfare, but with silence so heavy it seemed to press against the palace walls themselves. A silence that hid a secret capable of altering centuries of tradition. And if you think the future of the monarchy was as predictable as a straight line from Charles to William, you are about to discover why even the strongest crown can wobble under the weight of one hidden truth. Because on a night drenched in London fog, when the rest of the world slept in peace, Princess Anne stepped into history not as the quiet, reliable figure we thought we knew, but as the unexpected keeper of Queen Elizabeth's most startling confession, a revelation that would one day pit loyalty against destiny and force William and Charles to confront a reality they were never meant to face. But before I tell you what the Queen wrote, pause for a moment and ask yourself this. What if the crown's survival never depended on the kings at all, but on a woman who never even sought it? Someone already among us, hidden in plain sight. That is the secret Anne carried that night. A burden she could no longer keep to herself. And as she crossed the shadowed halls of Buckingham Palace, clutching a letter that felt heavier than any jewel of the crown, she knew the moment had come when silence could no longer protect the truth. For years, Anne had been the steady one, the quiet soldier of the family, the princess who never needed headlines or scandals, admired for her duty, but rarely the subject of whispers. Yet that very reliability was why the Queen had chosen her, trusting her daughter above anyone else to guard the one message that could either save or break the monarchy. And Anne had guarded it well, until grief softened the iron grip of secrecy, and conviction demanded she reveal what her mother had hidden. The palace that night was hushed, the air damp with fog pressing against iron gates, while inside, chandeliers glowed faintly over empty halls. Portraits of long-dead monarchs seemed to watch as Anne summoned Charles and William to a private chamber. No advisors, no courtiers, just blood, duty, and the unshakable weight of what was about to unfold. And as they gathered, the fire in the grate crackled louder than their words. For neither Charles nor William knew why Anne had insisted on this late-night meeting, and neither suspected that the monarchy they thought they understood was about to be rewritten. The table was dark mahogany, scarred by age, and upon it Anne placed a folded piece of paper, worn soft by time and the touch of her hands, and though her voice did not tremble, her heart did. As she said only this, "It's time you knew." Charles reached for it first, his fingers stiff with age and responsibility, and as his eyes scanned the careful, steady script of his late mother, his face drained of colour, the weight of every word striking him harder than any crown. And William leaned forward, his breath shallow, reading the same words twice, disbelief warring with duty. And in that suffocating silence the tick of the clock grew deafening, because the letter spoke of a future not with Charles, not even with William, but with Catherine, the woman the world called Kate Middleton, the princess who had walked into royalty not by birth but by love, who had never asked for power, but who had earned the trust of the people in ways no coronation could guarantee. Can you imagine the shock in that room? The realization that Elizabeth, the queen who had embodied tradition, had in her final wish pointed not to the obvious heirs but to someone unexpected, someone beloved, someone whose very ordinariness was her greatest strength. Charles broke the silence first, his voice hoarse, muttering to no one in particular. "This isn't how it's done," his face sagging under the weight of disbelief. And William, fists clenched, struggled to process the revelation, his pride pierced by the knowledge that even his grandmother had seen Catherine as the future he was raised to embody. And Anne, steady as stone, did not argue, for she was not there to debate, only to deliver, to honour the faith her mother had placed in her. Imagine the sting William must have felt. He had been groomed since childhood. The crown dangled before him as both duty and destiny. Yet now he sat across from his aunt, watching as the very foundation of that destiny shifted beneath him. And Catherine, oblivious, sat across the palace that very night, tucking her children into bed, sipping a forgotten cup of tea, looking out at the same fog that pressed against the windows, unaware that her life was being rewritten without her knowledge. Her name inked by a queen who saw in her not just a future consort, but the salvation of the monarchy itself. And here's where it gets even more fascinating. Elizabeth hadn't sought to change the law or rewrite the official line of succession. She knew it wasn't that simple, but she had written her truth nonetheless. Her belief that the people's love was stronger than bloodlines, that Catherine's quiet strength and grace mattered more than centuries of tradition, and in doing so, she planted a seed that, once revealed, could never be ignored. Now pause and think about this. What happens when a crown, built on rules, meets a legacy built on trust? Which one survives? That is the storm Anne unleashed that night. And though Charles slammed his hand against the table, muttering about madness, succession, and tradition, even he could not deny the flicker of doubt. For deep down, he knew the monarchy was fragile, its survival dependent not on rigid custom, but on the hearts of the people. And William, though torn, knew it too, because he had watched his wife endure the glare of cameras, the weight of expectation, the merciless press, and yet remain untouched by scandal, her composure never cracking, her compassion never dimming. And perhaps that was the very reason Elizabeth had chosen her. The meeting ended without resolution. The letter left like a live thing on the table, and Anne rose first, smoothing her skirt, her voice soft but firm as she said, "Whatever we decide, the world is changing. We can either change with it or be left behind." And with that, she left them to their thoughts, leaving behind silence thick enough to choke on. Across the palace, Catherine remained unaware, the quiet rhythm of her life unchanged. Her world of bedtime stories and charity work untouched by the storm brewing above her head. And that very unawareness made her even more powerful in the eyes of the Queen's wish, because Catherine never chased the crown, and perhaps that is why it seemed destined to chase her. By morning, the fog had lifted, but the weight of what had been revealed lingered like smoke in the halls, and the palace stirred not with routine but with unease, because news travels fast inside old walls, whispers running like cracks through stone. And before long, senior royals and advisers gathered for an urgent meeting, summoned not by protocol but by fear, for Anne had made her mother's wish clear. And now the question was no longer whether Catherine could be queen, but whether the monarchy could survive without her. Picture the scene. Anne enters first, not as the quiet sister, but as the general of her mother's last command, a leather folder in hand, her face carved from duty, followed by Charles, his calm mask stretched thin, and William, regal but restless, the fire in his eyes betraying the storm within. And when Anne placed the folder on the table and spoke with finality, "This is Her Majesty's last wish," no one could pretend it away anymore. Because the letter existed, the words were real, and the Queen had spoken from beyond the grave. The shock in that room was palpable. Advisers whispering, courtiers pale, Charles protesting with fury that tradition cannot be undone, William asking quietly, "And what about me? What am I now?" His voice heavy with the ache of a son, a prince, a man raised to inherit a crown now slipping further from reach. And Anne, steady, reassured him he was still vital, still needed but for the monarchy to endure. It must adapt, and Catherine was the key. The storm that started in whispers now grew louder, the walls of Buckingham Palace straining under the pressure of a future not yet announced, a truth too dangerous for the world to hear, and yet one that could not be buried forever, because the Queen's words had planted themselves in the minds of those who had read them, taking root like cracks in stone, unyielding, unstoppable. Meanwhile, Catherine continued her work, shaking hands at hospitals, comforting children, championing mental health, unaware that every smile, every kind word, was reinforcing the very argument her late grandmother-in-law had made, showing the people she was already the queen they needed, even if she had never asked for the title. But tradition does not break easily, and as days turned into weeks, the tension inside the palace grew unbearable. Rumours beginning to seep beyond the gates, whispers of secret letters and divided loyalties reaching the ears of tabloids eager for scandal. And though the world saw polished ceremonies and poised photographs, behind closed doors the family wrestled with a truth too dangerous to admit, that the monarchy's future might not rest with kings at all. And here's where you should lean in, because what happened next will not only shock you, it will challenge everything you thought you knew about loyalty, power, and the crown itself. By the time the whispers of Queen Elizabeth's secret began leaking beyond the palace walls, the world was already questioning the relevance of monarchy itself. Nations abroad murmuring about independence, young generations at home wondering if centuries of tradition still had meaning. And in the middle of this shifting tide, one name rose again and again. Not Charles, not William, but Catherine, the woman whose life had seemed ordinary until destiny drew her into extraordinary history. And as curious eyes turned toward her, the question grew louder. Could someone not born royal truly be the future of the crown? The answer required a journey into her past, a story far removed from palaces and thrones, One that began in a hospital in Reading on January 9, 1982, where Catherine Elizabeth Middleton first entered the world, the daughter of Michael, a flight dispatcher, and Carol, a former flight attendant, a family neither rich nor poor, but firmly grounded in hard work and resilience. A family that valued perseverance over privilege, lessons that would later shape a princess who knew how to serve rather than simply reign. Catherine's early years carried her across borders, to Amman, Jordan, where her father worked for British Airways, a childhood that exposed her to cultures beyond her own, teaching her adaptability and humility. And when the Middletons returned to England, Catherine continued her education at St Andrew's School, quickly standing out for her quiet independence and sense of responsibility, qualities her teachers admired. And later at Marlborough College, she developed the leadership that would follow her forever, captaining the girls' field hockey team and completing the challenging Duke of Edinburgh Gold Award. Yet her life was never one of pampered ease. Her mother's small business, Party Pieces, which began at the family kitchen table, grew through patience and grit, teaching Catherine that success was built, not bestowed, and in those lessons lay the foundation of a future queen who understood effort more than entitlement. But the most remarkable twists were still ahead, because after her schooling, Catherine ventured into a gap year filled with discovery, studying art in Florence, trekking and volunteering in Chile, and even working as a deckhand in Southampton. Each step shaping resilience and empathy, proof that she was no stranger to hard work, no stranger to carving meaning from the ordinary. Eventually, her path led to St Andrews University in Scotland, where she first crossed paths with Prince William, and though their friendship blossomed into romance quietly, away from cameras at first, by 2004 the world noticed, and Catherine's life was thrust under a spotlight so blinding it would have broken many. Yet she remained composed, even when tabloids nicknamed her Weighty Katie, mocking her patience during their long courtship. Even when public scrutiny dissected every choice she made, she carried herself with grace, a quality that did not go unnoticed by the Queen herself. Their relationship was not without hardship. Pressures split them briefly in 2007, a painful time Catherine later admitted forced her to grow stronger. And when they reunited, their bond was unshakable, culminating in their engagement in 2010 and their wedding in 2011, a moment watched by millions across the globe, when an ordinary woman stepped into extraordinary history, not because of a title but because of who she already was. And here is where you must pause and ask, what kind of strength does it take to face a world that sees you as both future queen and perpetual outsider? Catherine answered not with speeches but with actions, immersing herself in causes she truly cared about, from mental health to child welfare, quietly proving she was not in it for appearances but for service. And one of her most telling gestures came in 2018 when she privately donated 7 inches of her hair to the Little Princess Trust for children undergoing cancer treatment. A small act perhaps, but one that echoed loudly of compassion, the kind of authenticity you cannot fake. Long before her marriage, she had been involved in charity, organising fundraisers, supporting hospitals, giving time to children in need. And after joining the royal family, she only deepened this work, often choosing substance over spectacle, showing the world that her heart, not her title, defined her. And maybe that was why the Queen, in her final reflections, placed her trust not in the rules of succession, but in the spirit of service, and saw Catherine not merely as William's partner, but as the living embodiment of a future monarchy that could still matter. Yet this revelation, once whispered through palace corridors and eventually overheard by staff, ignited fierce debate far beyond the gates. Critics argued Catherine was too inexperienced in politics, that she should not leap ahead of her husband. That tradition was not hers to rewrite, while supporters insisted that the Queen's wisdom had seen what many had missed, that Catherine's humility and steadiness were exactly what the monarchy needed in an era when pomp alone could no longer secure loyalty. The debate spilled into tabloids, into late-night conversations, into online forums buzzing with speculation, and suddenly Catherine's life was dissected again. Not for scandals, but for signs of destiny. Every gesture, every glance weighed, as if it carried the answer to whether she truly was the crown's salvation. Inside the palace, the pressure mounted. Charles, restless, buried himself in history books, searching for guidance from monarchs who had endured chaos. William carried the revelation like a stone in his chest, torn between pride and awe, love and fear, for he admired his wife deeply, yet wrestled with the sting of knowing even his grandmother had seen in her what she had not fully seen in him, and this conflict gnawed at him silently, a private crucible. Imagine the weight, being raised as heir, only to discover that perhaps your greatest contribution was not to rule, but to stand beside the one chosen to preserve the monarchy's future. For Catherine, however, the test came when she was finally asked directly about the Queen's wish, and her response shocked even Charles and William, because she did not leap forward nor shy away. She answered with calm dignity, saying that while many desire to lead, a wife's greatest duty is to protect her family, and she would need time to think before accepting such a heavy role. Words that proved more than anything else why the Queen had chosen her. Because power meant nothing to her compared to peace. Because responsibility meant more to her than recognition. That answer alone deepened the debate, some seeing it as hesitation, others as proof of her wisdom. But all could agree. It was a response that felt both human and regal, a reminder that the crown cannot be measured only in diamonds, but in heart. Outside, the world continued its rhythm, ceremonies glittering, photographs polished. Yet beneath the surface, the monarchy stood on the edge, one step away from reinvention or collapse, and the people watched, holding their breath, wondering if Catherine would become the unexpected queen who saved an ancient institution, or the woman who quietly refused power for the sake of her family. And here's the question I leave with you. What would you have done in her place if the fate of a monarchy rested not on your ambition, but on your willingness to serve? Because the Queen had made her choice, Anne had carried it forward, and now the decision lingered like a crown suspended in mid-air, waiting to see if Catherine would claim it or gently push it aside. What happens next could reshape not only the House of Windsor, but the very idea of monarchy in the modern world, and you will want to be here when that story continues. So if you found yourself drawn into this hidden history, if you believe some truths are too powerful to stay buried, then don't just leave. Subscribe, join us, because the next chapter in Catherine's journey and the royal family's fight for survival is one you cannot afford to miss, and I promise you, what comes next will challenge everything you thought you knew about royalty.